Hello and welcome to the Faculty of Engineering's Graduate Studies Ask Me Anything event for the Department of Chemical Engineering. My name is Sarah Landy. I am the Manager of Graduate Operations for the Faculty of Engineering, and I will be your host for today's event. During today's event, we will be hearing from faculty, current students, and admission experts from the Department of Chemical Engineering. At the end of our presentation, we encourage you to use the Q&A button within your webinar screen to submit any questions you may have about our graduate programs for our panelists. You can also upvote questions submitted in the Q&A chat by clicking on the thumbs up icon. This shows us that many students are interested in the answer to that question. Within the chat, my colleagues Catherine, Jen, and Emily will be answering questions you have, as well as sharing some helpful links, so keep an eye out for them. During the second half of our event, we will have the live Q&A session using questions that were pre-submitted, as well as questions that you are asking live in the chat. This event is being recorded and all information is current as of November 4th, 2021. So let's get started. I'd like to hand it over to our panelists now, so please welcome our first presenter.
Oh, it's me. Sorry. So, hi, my name is Nasser Aboukhder. I'm the Associate Chair of Grad Studies for the Department of Chemical Engineering here at the University of Waterloo. Welcome. And if we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to give a very brief overview of the department. We have approximately 250 graduate students at any point in time during the semester, 41 faculty members, 5 lab instructors, and additionally dedicated technical staff. We're also unique in the Faculty of Engineering that we have our own purpose-built building with modern labs and relatively state-of-the-art instrumentation, Engineering 6. So the academic expertise and support for Waterloo's multidisciplinary biomedical, nanotechnology, engineering, and nano and water programs. And so the nano and water programs are collaborative graduate programs which are quite unique. They come from kind of both research expertise in the department, but also typically undergrad programs supporting that. The department is quite collaborative and very interdisciplinary in pretty much every area of chemical engineering, from polymers, both on applied side and a polymer chemistry side, reaction engineering, biochemical engineering, process systems engineering, optimization, modeling, and control, including emerging areas that are still chemical engineering related. So fuel cell research, battery research, energy storage, tissue engineering, and in general, nanotechnology. Next slide, please. So again, we have a very collaborative department. Many faculty are working together. Many groups involve collaborative projects, both within the faculty, within the department, within the faculty, but also with industry in Canada and abroad. And so we have a few different kind of formalizations of these collaborations. One of them is a Center for Bioengineering and Biotechnology, the Chemical Process Optimization, Multiscale Modeling, and Process Systems Research Groups, the Computational Multiphysics Research Group, that's my one I'm involved in. The Institute for Polymer Research, which is a pretty large and pretty well-established polymer research institute in Ontario. The Water Institute, and they oversee the collaborative grad program in water, which the Waterloo Center for Microbial Research, and then the Waterloo Institute for Nanotechnology, where the IPR, the Water Institute, and the Waterloo Institute for Nanotechnology are by far the larger out of this list. And they, a few of the graduate programs that we have that are collaborative are kind of facilitated by those institutes. Next slide, please. So we have a broad range of research and course-based programs. So we have research-based programs, a master's, MASC, and a PhD, obviously. And optionally, you can just do the regular master's and PhD, or you can participate in collaborative nano and water program variations. And then we have a practice-focused master's of chemical engineering. And actually, I have an MEng from a different university, but I'm probably one of the few faculty members of the department who actually have experience with an MEng. And we also have some relatively new specializations that are optional, and they kind of make the MEng a bit more focused in biological engineering, polymer science and engineering, and process systems engineering. Next slide, please. So we have mostly exceptional faculty. You know, we have kind of a broad range of faculty with different backgrounds, from chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, biomedical engineering. And, you know, while supervision varies depending on the faculty member, in general, we have relatively high quality supervision. I mean, being the associate chair over the past 3 years, and kind of seeing the amount of effort that our faculty put into their graduate students, you get a feel for that. It's not always the case at many universities. We have comprehensive research experience, and this is really important if you want to do high impact research. You need not just the expertise of your supervisor, you need to have mentors and collaborations, you know, down the hall, not necessarily, you know, far away, with expertise that you might need. And we do quite a lot of research that's not just kind of high impact, but it's also collaborative with industry, which is really good with respect to employment prospects after your graduate studies. Because after all, you're only going to be here for 2 to 4 or 1 to 4 or maybe even 5 years. Afterwards, you have a whole career to worry about, and you want to make sure that you're prepared for employment and not just have another credential. And then we have an entrepreneurial spirit, mainly because of our intellectual property policies and our propensity to be engaged with industry during our research. We have a very good IP policy. I believe it's unique in the world. Don't quote me on that, but I'm quite sure there are only maybe a handful of universities that have an inventor-owned IP policy, which includes graduate students. The university does not claim any of the IP, apart from some rights to use it for research and teaching purposes. And we regularly have spin-off companies, and many of our faculty are involved in these, along with graduate students and undergrads. And we also do a lot of consulting as well, with industry in Canada and abroad. Next slide, please. So the areas of research, they're quite broad. We have many faculty who are involved in 3 or more of these. But in the end, if you're interested in doing research or just coursework that is taught by someone who has experience in the area, that's probably likely to happen in our department because of this breadth of research. I'm not going to read them all out. It's quite a lot. You can read through them yourselves. But in the end, you know, especially if you're interested in a research-based master's or PhD, you should be looking at faculty in specific, because the research will kind of combine many of these areas, and they'll describe that best. These research areas are mainly just to show the breadth of what's going on in the department, which is quite large, given that we have a large department, over 40 faculty. Next slide, please. So I'm not sure that Seema was able to attend, so I guess we'll just skip to Thomas. That's okay.
Hey everyone, I'm Thomas. Yeah, that's the slide. That's good. I'm a master's student who's just about graduating. Been here for 2 years and a bit at the University of Waterloo, and doing my master's in chemical engineering with the nanotechnology specialty option. Yeah, I have sort of 4 things I'll touch on today very quickly, and then feel free to follow up in questions later. One of the most important things when choosing a master's is choosing an area of research that you find actually interesting, and something more than just like half kind of cool, and something you think you can work on for 2 years. But also don't limit yourself too much, because it happens to every student, research masters, or anything, that they decide they come in doing one thing and they come out doing something completely different. That said, the work hours can vary, but usually most people I know try to keep themselves to about 8-hour days. There are some longer, some shorter, and depending on the research you're doing, like if you're making gold nanoparticles, sometimes those can be like 12, 14-hour days, but they're not super strenuous 12, 14-hour days. They're a lot of like watching Netflix and then poking a reaction flask every so often. And then you take the next day off because you've worked for 2 days in a row in one. That said, classes on the graduate side are usually, I wouldn't say easier, but more relaxed. They're, as I find they're more knowledge focused rather than like rote memorization focused. And so the time it takes on classes, I would say, is less. 1, because you're taking less classes, but 2, because they're a lot more flexible in what they can teach. In terms of classes, I really found graduate studies is a good opportunity to take classes that I wouldn't normally take in a traditional undergrad program, and especially really some specialized topics, which I found very interesting. Yeah, deciding on a research project, once again, that's something you should sort out with your supervisor in mind. And when you're choosing a supervisor and choosing a research project, be really open with that decision-making process. And we can talk about that more later, but you're choosing something that you're working on together for 2 years. So it's something that you should sort of craft together into something that you really think you can work on. I really like the campus experience at Waterloo. I find it's very engaged. There's the graduate house, which is sort of the grad student pub, which is always a fun place to go and a good place to engage. But there's all sorts of grad activities in the grad student society that allow graduate students to meet each other. And one, this is really nice for the social aspect, but it's actually very helpful for the research aspect, because it turns out frequently that you'll meet someone at this party who's working on something very similar to you, and you can actually get a collaboration through there, or maybe you just need a machine that they happen to have. So yeah, I would really encourage you to go out and enjoy the campus experience. I think that's all for now, and we'll follow up in the Q&A.
Okay, hi there, I'm Judy. Judy Caron, Manager of Graduate Studies for Chemical Engineering. Next slide, please, Sarah. So we have a total of 7 programs within our department that you're able to apply into. We have our MEng program, which Professor Abukdare indicated could also morph into a specialization. We have master's programs in chemical engineering, nanotechnology, and water, as well as PhD program in chemical, nanotechnology, and water. The length of your program will depend on the type of program. Our MEng has been set up to be successfully completed in 3 academic terms or 1 year. Our master's program, which involves a research component, has been set up to be completed within 2 years. And our PhD program, which also includes a research component, has been set up to be completed in 4 years. If you are a direct admit from a bachelor's into a PhD, that would be, we would add 3 terms onto that to make it a 6-year program. So that's typically the typical length of the programs. Funding is interesting. There's guaranteed standard funding packages in place for research students. The MEng program is a self-funded program, which is a big reason that we've actually tried to make it into a 1-year program. We wanted to make it attractive to people to be able to complete in a short amount of time, and also the most economical way possible for them. Funding is standard at a minimum of $18,000 for master's students and $24,504 for PhD students. When you're talking about a research program, as Thomas indicated, finding a supervisor it's really quite important. It's very, very important that you do a little bit of legwork, which we can talk about later on, to help you drill down and find a supervisor who's doing research in an area that's of interest to you. Our goal here is to get you doing is to get you to do research that's interesting to you, because if you're passionate and interested in the work that you do, you become a better student and you produce a better end product. Next slide, please. So that's just a quick chart that can show you the minimum funding that is available to our master's and PhD students. It gives you a little bit of an idea of what you can expect when you're here as a student with us. Okay. Next slide, please. So as far as funding and awards are concerned, the university as well as the Faculty of Engineering are working very, very hard to ensure that we make as many awards available to our students as possible. I don't think a week goes by when I don't send emails out to my grad students, making them aware of an award that they may choose to apply into. There are a lot of awards available. We also have a database And the database link is below. You can filter down on the kind of information that's pertinent to you, and then the database will help you look for awards that you may qualify for. So the link to the database, it's very important that you try and use that to your advantage. Anybody and everybody can use it. Thank you. Next slide. So above and beyond the internal awards database that we have, we also run competitions every year for external awards. These external awards are, there are competition time limits. In fact, we've just finished our OGS International competition, and we're just about to get going on our Tri-Council CGSM Masters application process. So there are schedules and time limits in place for all of these awards. They're well advertised. They're made available to all students to apply into. Some of these awards are specific to Canadian and permanent residents. There's a Vanier Award, there's NSERC Doctoral, the Tri-Council Awards. OGS has a competition for international students as well as domestic students. And as I said, these awards are well advertised, and our students are very, very much encouraged to apply for them. They're prestigious, they sit on your transcript. Thank you. Next slide. This is additional funding that is available to our students, both through the faculty. Well, these are Faculty of Engineering specific. So we have entrance awards for students who meet a benchmark. These are for domestic students. Our dean will provide you with what they call a Dean's Entrance Award. It is valued at up to $5,000, and it's paid over the first 2 terms that you are with us as a graduate student. The same thing with fellowships. We have Engineering Excellence Master's Fellowships as well as Doctoral Fellowships. These fellowships are available to, again, domestic students that are hitting a minimum grade benchmark. This is stuff that I can talk over with you in the chat or offline as well. And then for any of our students that are successful in winning a Vanier or an NSERC award, you will receive that award plus an additional top up because you won the award. And we're trying to make sure you're well looked after. There is a note, you also have the option of completing a teaching assistantship. It's not a requirement, and it is never part of your funding package. It is something that we expect our students to apply into. In chemical engineering, we treat this like a job, and like a job, you may have an interview process. There's certainly an application process for this. Next slide, please. So this slide is just meant to highlight the fact that both the university and faculty have been working hard to try to bring up PhD funding and provide what they call an International Doctoral Student Award. All of our PhD students, international PhD students, get this award. This, the addition of this award is meant to help offset the international tuition rates, bringing up your overall amount that you earn each year and helping to put you as much in line as possible with Canadian and permanent residents tuition income on campus here at Waterloo. Thank you. We also have a fairly new fellowship. I think it's about a year old now. It's the Indigenous and Black Engineering and Technology Momentum Fellowship, and students are encouraged. If you're identifying in this group, you are strongly encouraged to apply into this this fellowship. There's a link on the bottom here that will give you more information and the criteria that's involved for this fellowship. This fellowship has a date by which you have to apply. I think it's February 1st. I'm sorry, but again, it's on the detailed funding page there. Again, it's a new fellowship that's being offered through the university, and it is a ranked fellowship, which means not everybody wins one. They choose who wins. Next slide, please. Okay, so as far as applications are concerned, we do have deadlines in place. I'll talk about the fall admission cycle. The fall admission cycle has a deadline of February 1st. That's a hard deadline. So anybody who's wishing to be admitted for fall 2022 has to apply in before February 1st. Obviously for the fall term, I use September 1st as the start date, but it's close. I think it was September 6th this year, the Monday, September 6th. So there's an application deadline, and then that means, let's say you were to apply into the program on January the 31st. In my department, I have a standard here whereby I will ask you to complete your application documents within 10 business days. As long as you apply before February 1st, you will be given an additional 10 business days by which to complete your application. We encourage all students to start the process early. It's a super, super busy application season. We get hundreds and hundreds of applications, and we do go through each and every one of them. So the earlier that you apply, the longer your application will be considered for admission. Next slide, please. I'm gonna throw this one back to Professor Aboukder. He likes to talk about how to choose a supervisor. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is mainly focused on research-based master's and PhD students, MN students. Your supervisor is going to be the associate chair, so me. You don't really have a choice in that matter. So, for research-based degrees in general, how this process works is very different than maybe in other countries in Canada. And so literally you do choose a supervisor in that in order to get accepted into UW in general, engineering at least, you need to have a supervisor who agrees to fund you and to supervise you during your research, whether you're a research-based master's or a PhD student. And in general, departments work differently from my understanding, but our department, we suggest you contact prospective faculty before applying, and at least have them have some interest before you go ahead and apply. Definitely do not just apply listing some preferred faculty and assume that you're going to be considered by those faculty. That's not really how our system works. So that's just a pragmatic thing. It's very important. Try and email faculty. If you're having trouble getting in touch with certain faculty, you're welcome to email me through my associate chair position, and I can try and get them to respond in cases that they don't typically faculty do. It just might take some time, especially during the fall semester. So that's really a kind of a pragmatic thing. But separately, how do you choose? Well, hopefully you have more than one faculty interested in you for a position. But even if you don't, I cannot state enough with more kind of importance that your experience at any university doing graduate studies is, I would say, 80 to 90% influenced by your supervisor and the research group you're working in, and not necessarily by the university reputation, facilities, those things. So you need to really put a lot of effort into making sure that you're not just looking for a position in an area you're interested in, but you're also looking for a position in an area you're interested in, supervised by someone that has that you can work with, and in a group that you can integrate into, which is pretty tough to do. But this can happen and should happen through an interview process. So a good starting point for this whole process is to actually use our web pages, use individuals' profile pages, or in some cases they have research group websites. Learn about their research. Don't just assume that from a little description or a blurb that you see that you understand what they're doing. You can actually look at their research papers, look at the titles at least. That should be the minimum. Understand what research they're currently doing. and be able to explain to faculty members why you're interested in their research group and how their research aligns with your career goals. Show them that you have some kind of motivation and vision for your future, so they know if you do come here, you're going to be not just going through the motions. You're going to be really engaged, because research-based degrees, they're really challenging from a motivation perspective, right? And faculty, we want to work with people that are motivated and excited about the work. And then obviously contact via email. Typically, some students try and actually call offices. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Email is usually the main vehicle, and then typically interviews will happen via teleconference. Okay. Many faculty, such as myself, if I'm interested in a student, I'll ask them to go ahead and apply. I want to see kind of formally their application package, right? Even if I haven't made a firm decision. And some faculty don't do that. You really need to contact the faculty member. So like I said, email is the best approach. Expect doing some teleconferences. If you do kind of get the interest of a faculty member, and make sure when you contact them and they do read your email that it's short, it's concise, and it says pertinent things. I'm interested in graduate school because of this. I'm interested in your research group because of something specific, not something they did 20 years ago, but something you're doing now based upon your literature review, your short review of their research. And explain, really get across the point that you're not just emailing every faculty member, emailing hundreds of people. That comes off very clearly when people do that, right? We want to know that you're interested in our work, and we want to know why we should be interested in you being in our group. And that's I think the best advice I can give, apart from really, take this process as your first research project, right? And if you do well, then it'll really result in a really good experience, whether it's at UW or another university. And if you do poorly, well, maybe it's not the right approach for you career-wise. So I think that's it, right? I guess, yeah.
You want me to continue?
Okay, getting accepted, yeah, this is me too, right? Or no?
Sure.
Okay. So who gets accepted? I mean, it depends on, again, whether you're applying to a research-based degree or the MEng. If it's a research-based degree, the supervisor has almost 100% control over who's accepted based upon their funding, their positions, applicants. Obviously, you have to meet some minimum criteria, including an English language requirement if your undergrad wasn't in English. But for research-based degrees, that's completely in the hands of the research supervisor that you would work for. We do not admit as a department students into research-based programs. We simply oversee who the faculty are admitting. For MEng students, this is different. We have a certain number of slots per year, and we try to recruit up to that number. The process is pretty simple. You have to apply. Obviously, we're not going to look at, I don't want you emailing me individually. You have to apply so I can see your background. And we have myself and a committee that goes through these applications, looking for a few things. Some engineering backgrounds is important. The MEng is an advanced degree in chemical engineering. It's not an introduction to chemical engineering. So that's always a point of confusion for some applicants. But we go through and we basically look for students who have a good background in engineering and have some motivation to do a industry-focused graduate degree. So make sure you communicate that in your application. Do UW students have an advantage? Yes, they do. I mean, realistically, most UW students have applied. The committee has taught them, right? So we know their abilities, we know their motivations, et cetera. But it's not an advantage that puts anyone else at a disadvantage, typically. So that's not really a huge issue. How do some people stand out from other applicants? Well, I mean, for the MEng, grades do matter, for sure. But also your motivation for wanting to do an MEng also matters. You have to have the right motivation. And that is you want to have a better understanding of the discipline for professional practice typically, and that's basically I would say it. The one thing I might also mention, well, no, let's not worry about So regarding scholarships, I think that's Judy's thing, right? So I'll just stop talking now.
Last but not least, I believe one of the ladies is going to put a link in the chat box. That link is so that you can connect directly with me and we can have a one-on-one Teams or telephone meeting, whatever your choice. I personally find at this stage that there's lots of questions that people want to ask, but sometimes they're very, very specific to themselves and they're not comfortable sharing. So we're very happy to answer any questions that you may have. And you can put them in the chat box if that works for you. Otherwise, like I said, the ladies will put a link in the chat box that you can use to connect with me directly, and we'll go from there. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you very much to our panelists. It's time to begin our Q&A session. So a reminder, continue to submit your questions using the Q&A button within your webinar screen and upvote any questions you would like to hear the answer to. So for our first question, I'm going to direct it to our student panelists. Can you tell us, Thomas, now that you're almost at the end of your graduate degree, what is something you wish you knew before you started, some wisdom that you can impart upon our prospective applicants?
Yeah, so before I started my degree, I had done a couple co-ops in research. And so I messaged all the PhD students I know and said, what should I know going into this? And the number one thing that they said has been said many times, which is find a good supervisor. And that doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. Sometimes that means like if you are a student that needs sort of the cracking the whip style motivation and you just want to like crank out papers, then you have to find someone who'll do that for you. If you want to find someone who is into like a holistic project where you try to do a deep dive into one phenomenon, you have to find someone who will work with that for you. Someone who will work with the project for you, whose style works for you and whose group management style works for you. And what that involves is more than just like reading the research and sending them emails, but finding post students, like emailing them to see how their experience was and if that works, that experience type works for you. Emailing the professor directly and saying like, what is your management style? Like how do students go for your group? Do you have subgroups? Is it a professor oversees postdocs actually manage style group, or is the professor in the lab every day? So that's answer number one to that question. Answer number two to that question, which I found out myself, is if you're in a research-based program, I would take most of your classes early. Number one, because in the first couple terms, you're sort of deciding what your project will be anyways, and more knowledge is always helpful there. But number two is it happens to a lot of people that they get through the project and they take a course that they've been meaning to take for a while and finally get around to. And it turns out it has these nice little nuggets of wisdom that are really helpful for things they would have liked to know 6 to 8 months ago. So I would take your courses early, do your learning up front so that you know everything that you need to know going in.
Those are fantastic insights. Thank you very much, Thomas. Nasser, our next question I'm going to direct to you. If someone were a prospective applicant who's been in industry for a number of years, like 10, 20, 30 years, is coming to an MEng program something that they would be eligible to do, or is this primarily for fresh graduates?
Okay, I can answer that question in two ways. Based upon my experience, I mean, I was in industry for over 3 years before I started my PhD, and I did find it was a bit rough taking the coursework, especially. And I was only out of university for 3 years, so I definitely think this is a challenge. We have had a few applicants, or not applicants, students do this, and I would say one of them, I won't name her name, but by far the most successful approach is to actually do this part-time, and that is take a course per term, and that way, because if you're taking 2 or 3 courses per term, like a full-time student would, and you find you don't have the background for 2 or 3 of them, the work becomes just intractable. Where if you take the courses part-time, you might even be able to continue working and make the background up as you go along. So I think the part-time approach, which we have, is probably the best approach for people that have been out of academia for a long time, depending on what kind of job you've had, right? So if that's the kind of thing where we should probably talk and see.
Great.
Have conversation. So
yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Nasser. Judy, you mentioned about tri-agency scholarships, and we have a prospective applicant wondering if they need to be granted admission in order to apply for the scholarship, or can they apply for a tri-agency prior to being granted admission?
You can apply to the tri-agency, but I'm going to tell you as well, you should be applying into the system. We should have you down as an applicant to a program as well as an applicant to a scholarship or an award.
Okay, great. So making sure that you're applying to both is important.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. Judy, could you shed some more light on just how the teaching assistantship process works in ChemEng?
Yeah, we work really hard to make this the most fair, equitable process that we possibly can. We have an application system that opens each term that allows students to apply into the system and choose up to 3 teaching assistant positions that they may be interested in. Along with those positions, there's typically a list of credentials that we're looking for, things that we'd like you to have experience in, because we need people with experience to do these tasks. It's very important. You are looking at being a teaching assistant to undergrads, and we need you to have the appropriate background and training in order to be able to do that. After the application system closes, we have a system, it's like an optimizer program that runs through and tries to figure out who is maybe best suited for the position. But at the end of the day, we also have a committee that looks at each and every one of these and tries to be as fair and equitable with the process as possible. In our system, we actually also have a student representative from our Chemical Engineering Grad Student Association that sits in on these meetings to ensure that things are happening in a fair way.
Perfect. Thank you. And Thomas, do you have experience being a teaching assistant?
I did.
And how did you find that experience as a student?
As a student, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah, I found the experience of applying actually very easy, and compared to some of my friends in other faculties, I would say that the chemical engineering faculty has figured it out the best. But the teaching assistant itself, I really enjoyed. The compensation is nice, but the opportunity to interact and sort of relearn material now that you know it again, and then learn through teaching, I thought was very helpful.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Nasser, you talked a little bit about supplementary information forms, or the SIF. What are some of the key statements or things that students should make sure they're including in their SIF to really stand out?
It's a hard question. I would say the first thing is be honest. Be honest. Don't say what you think people want to hear. So, I mean, it's kind of contradictory because I'm also going to tell you what we want to hear, but that's most important, right? We read through literally thousands of these things over a few years. And when someone's sincere and passionate, it really stands out. And that can really make a big difference, especially if maybe their undergraduate grades weren't as fantastic as someone else, that kind of thing. With respect, so just be sincere. That's just very important. That being said, some of the things that are going to stand out if they're sincere, do you have actual motivation to do graduate studies? So if you're someone who graduate studies is just the next thing that seems like the right thing to do for you, you want to continue in a university, you don't want to go out into the workforce, then what you're going to write in your supplement is not going to sound as strong as someone who actually has a reason to do graduate studies, right? So for example, if you want to do a PhD, and let's say you have an undergrad and you are interested in doing a PhD, you should explain why you're not interested in starting with a master's, right? If you want to do a master's, you should explain how that master's is going to fit into your overall career goals. If you don't do that, you just say, I am interested in things, this is not enough. You know, I'm personally very interested in, you know, cars, right? But that's not enough for me to get a job at, or even apply for a job at, you know, let's say Tesla or GM or whatever. It's not just what you're interested in, it's what your end goal is, right? So I think, and having read a lot of these, many students, you know, and very good students, they don't realize that this is something that we want to hear about. You know, where do you see yourself in 10, 15, 20 years? And how does this experience prepare you for it? Do you think, at least? So that really stands out to me, and I think other faculty members. And what also stands out for research-focused students is why you're interested in a particular area, and how, again, that fits into your career goals. The reoccurring theme here is, you know, be sincere and explain what your motivations are and how and why you think you're well prepared, not necessarily compared to others, why you think you're well prepared, why you think you have, what skills you have that you think prepare you well for grad studies. What skills do you think you will build, right? Go off the top of my head, apart from MN students, again, how does this fit into your career? How does this fit in your career goal? Does this activity fit into your career goals, right? What are your career goals? Why an MN versus just getting a job and building experience, that kind of thing. So hopefully that was useful.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Judy, we talked about funding, minimum funding guarantees and that sort of thing. Can you break down the source of the funding for a student? So is the funding coming from the supervisor? Is it coming from the department? Is it coming from the university? How are students being paid?
Sure. The funding, the minimum funding on the slide that was shown that showed master's students earning $18,000 and PhD students earning $24,504, I believe. Those two numbers are direct guarantees from the supervisor who is admitting you. So each and every supervisor that admits you into a master's or PhD program must provide minimum funding. That's guaranteed. The Faculty of Engineering, to my knowledge, I think is the only faculty that has this type of guarantee in place on campus, or at least at this level. And they feel very strongly about it. We realize money doesn't solve everything. And of course, it would be great if we could always pay more, but this is where we're at today. So the funding, the $18,000 and the $24,504 are funding packages that come directly from your supervisor, and they're paid out. So each amount would be sort of divided by 3 and paid out in 3 equal installments for each year that you're registered, each term that you're registered. So for a master's student, you would be receiving $6,000 per term. And if you had a TA, for instance, on top of that, that's money that comes from the department. It's paid out like a paycheck. It's paid out once a month. There will be vacation pay added on to that, and there may be deductions taken from that because it is considered taxable income.
Yeah, and I think we're maybe dancing around this, but I'll make it pretty clear. So far, we've mentioned about funding for PhD students, both domestic and international, and we also have talked about master's students, MESC students who are domestic. Currently, over the past few years, the funding situation has changed for international masters as in research students, and you'll basically, the stipend is everything added together with tuition, given the international student tuition. The funding situation is not very good for international MESC students. So if you are an international student interested in a research-based master's, you need to take that into account. And if you do have someone interested in admitting you, you probably would need to understand the funding situation very well and potentially negotiate for not the minimum stipend, right? Faculty members can pay you above the minimum stipend. It's not like the only value. So but for international master's students, the MASC students, the funding situation is not as good, I would say, as the other research-based programs.
I would also add to that, that if we have any international students with us that are considering a master's, to please reach out to me, and I'm happy to explain and break down the funding to you so that you can understand exactly how much you're getting as opposed to how much you're paying. I'm happy to do that.
And then, sorry, just one last thing. In the end, the contract that you have is with the university, right? And so the funding will come from the supervisor, but the contract you have signing the offer of admission, that is with the university, which is twofold. If something does happen with your supervisor, again, the university is on the hook for your funding based upon what is described in the offer letter. So for those of you who hopefully do apply and get an offer, make sure the offer letter describes the funding you expect to get before you sign it. Okay.
Great, thank you both. Very insightful. Nasser, in terms of collaborative research, we mentioned that we have collaborative programs, but in going a step further in independent projects, there's someone who's specifically interested in applying something like machine learning techniques to chemical engineering. Is collaborative research like that something that the department can support and faculty members are interested in doing?
So if we're talking about a research-focused degree, then what I suggest, and you're not going to want to hear this, but what I suggest is to throw out that constraint for two reasons. The first reason is you're going to be limiting the number of potential positions that you would be considered for by having such a specific interest, if that makes sense. And the second reason is machine learning is a very broad, machine learning encompasses a very, very broad set of concepts and approaches, et cetera. And there are people that all over the world right now who are doing research that involves machine learning, but they don't call it machine learning. There are people all over the world right now who are doing research that involves machine learning that aren't doing machine learning. And so in the end, machine learning, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, there are a whole bunch of areas that are kind of, they catch the popular interest, right? You have to really be careful and make sure that, and I'm not saying, and this might not apply to you. You might be an expert in machine learning, right? So I'm just saying in general, I've had this conversation a billion times in the past, probably 5 years. I would not restrict your research interest to be in one particular area, especially something like machine learning or controls or process modeling, or like you want to have more broad interests and sometimes make sacrifices in your interests to get the best research supervisor. Okay, and I'll give you an example. Me, for my PhD, I did my PhD at McGill in the Department of Chemical Engineering. I was privileged enough to be making decent money in the US, so I funded a trip. I flew to Montreal and I interviewed with 5 different faculty members. And the one who had the project that was least desirable to me, I knew would be the best supervisor for me. Okay, I didn't know what liquid crystal phases were, before I started my PhD, but I knew that Professor Alejandro Rey was the best supervisor for me, and he would be a great supervisor. And over the next year, I learned to love liquid crystal physics, right, and structured fluids and condensed matter physics and his research area. Having that flexibility and open-mindedness is really important. And in the end, once you're involved in a research project, you can always pull concepts from machine learning. Because chemical engineers have been doing machine learning before machine learning was, a popular phrase, right? I mean, process systems engineering involves machine learning techniques. We just don't call it machine learning, right? Because we're not all computer scientists and mathematicians, right? That was a long-winded answer, but this is kind of a question that comes up quite a bit. And I really don't want, really good students to end up kind of stymiating their own, potential because they kind of, what's the word? They're limiting their focus to something, right? You can apply machine learning to any research on campus, I promise you, right? You can apply data analysis techniques to any research on campus. So I wouldn't start that as in your email conversation with a potential supervisor, is what I'm saying. Hopefully that was useful, but it's a really good thing to ask, I think, because a lot of students will focus on, biomedical or this or that. Try and be a little more broad in your interests. Start with the research that actual faculty are doing, right? And try and see if that fits within what you're interested in.
That's great. That's a great answer. Thank you, Nasser.
Can I follow up on that actually?
Yeah, of course.
Because I think this is a good example to talk about. We've talked about choosing a good supervisor, but we actually have a good example of someone who has a research interest that they've identified. And notwithstanding everything Nasser says, which is the correct answer on that, it's just a good opportunity to talk about exactly how you go about finding someone you're interested in. So once again, if you've correctly identified that you like machine learning, and as Professor Bouvedier says, you should choose and think about whether you actually just like coding, or you like the workflow that machine learning does, or whether you're actually interested in vector transformations and mathematics and convolutional neural nets, in which case you're probably looking at the CS degree anyways. Thinking about that and refining down to what actually you want to do. Not just, I would like to do machine learning and chemical engineering, but are you passionate about clean tech and you want to use machine learning to improve XYZ process for algae growth and carbon capture? Or do you want to do that? And then looking at supervisors that have similar options to you and keeping your mind open. So I would think a little bit more about not just the work you'd like to be doing, but what you'd actually like your output to be, what the contribution you would like to make at the end of your research is. And then keeping a completely open mind and preparing to throw that all away when you actually look at all of the supervisors and the research they're doing. And whether maybe the research they're doing is completely different, but it has the same sort of total contribution you would like to make at the end of your research career. And then from there, emailing supervisors who maybe do or do not have expertise, depending on your level of comfort with a particular process. So maybe, again, let's sticking with you've identified that you would like to improve carbon capture through bioreacting of algae. And you think that there is a machine learning application that you can make to this process. Finding a professor who has expertise in the biocarbon capture through algae, and then writing them an email and saying hey, I've looked at these 3 papers. I think the process you have is good, but there's a lot of controls optimizations to be made. And I think these techniques can improve that, is a much more powerful ask than I would like to apply machine learning to your research. Because that could be anything. And then you'll be stuck in sort of the nebulous of what am I actually doing?
That's great. Thank you. Very well said, Thomas. Judy, a little bit about the background of prospective applicants. So not everybody who applies will necessarily have a background in chemical engineering specifically. What are some of the other disciplines that you see applying to Chem-Eng?
So when we talk about background in chemical engineering, I think it's really important to divide the research programs from the course-based programs. We have students that apply from all different areas of engineering, as well as we get a lot of people from chemistry. And some of our faculty are doing work that crosses over into the chemistry area. So that's fine. If you're coming in with a chemistry background and you've found a supervisor that wants to supervise you and put you in an engineering-based master's or PhD program, you better get your feet wet and do maybe audit some undergrad courses to at least give yourself an appropriate background. We do have courses that are mandatory that you take, and these graduate level courses are chemical engineering courses. So without a background, you're going to need to educate yourself and help yourself out in that area. When we're talking about our course-based programs, we very much expect to see a chemical engineering background. It's what works best for that program. We don't want to set our students up to fail. We want to have them coming in with an appropriate background so that they can be successful in the program that they're in. Professor Aboukder, do you have anything you want to add to that? Because I'm sure I've missed something.
No, so basically what Judy's talking about is has been an ongoing discussion, I think, in many departments all over the world at this point. And there are really 2 schools of thought, and I'll tell you what our department currently thinks, and that is So what is the point of a research-based graduate degree? Some departments, some faculty will say, well, this is for people to do good research, right? That's the point. But other departments will say, well, it's to do research, but also to advance yourself in the field. That's why you don't just get a graduate degree in, let's say, engineering or in philosophy, right? If you want to be the most general, right? Philosophical sciences. You get a graduate degree in chemical engineering or electrical and computer engineering or computer science. So if you're going to be doing a research-based graduate degree at the University of Waterloo in chemical engineering, you will be taking some foundational courses that are above and beyond what a chemical engineering undergrad will be taking, right? So if you don't have a chemical engineering undergraduate background, you need to take that into account. You're going to have to pass courses and show that you have some ability to practice in the field of chemical engineering. For some faculty members who do interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary research, because of this, including myself, we are cross-appointed in other departments. I'm cross-appointed in physics. Some faculty are cross-appointed in chemistry. Some are cross-appointed in biology, right? They have very different foundational skills, right? So if you have a background, undergraduate background that might not prepare you well for chemical engineering coursework at an advanced level, you need to take that into account, okay? And we're not going to say no for research-based students, right? Unless we really think you're not going to, succeed, right? If you haven't done any calculus in your undergrad, you're gonna have trouble, right? Any Newtonian physics, that kind of thing. Now for MEng students, this is really confusing because in the University of Waterloo, there are course-based master's programs that are designed, so computer science has these, right? You can come from, they have course-based programs that are designed to take someone without a CS background and give them some computer science background in the form of a master's, right? And we don't do that in this department. For us, the MEng is meant to provide advanced training above and beyond the undergrad, right? This is not a transitional program. And if we were to do a transitional program, it wouldn't be a graduate degree. It would be an undergraduate, program. Because in the end, we don't want to be teaching undergraduate course content in a graduate degree program. It doesn't make a lot of sense to us. So the MEng, I will look for some significant engineering background. You will not be considered unless you have, the reasonable engineering background, because you'll be taking up to 8 courses, 5 of which will be graduate level advanced chemical engineering courses. So that was a long-winded answer, but I think it was an important thing to address because there are, even in engineering, other departments that treat their MEng as like a transitional thing. And we don't do that. If you're going to come here and do an MEng in chemical engineering, you're going to learn beyond undergraduate concepts in chemical engineering, right? And outside as well. We allow you to take courses in management sciences, in Conrad, the business school, like project management, in ECE, in mechanical engineering, but we limit those, so.
Okay, great, thank you. Judy, I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions here. When a student applies, the question is, can I apply to more than one supervisor at the time of admission for consideration? Okay. Can you just explain how that works in the application process?
Yeah, inside the application process, there is actually a free-form field where you can identify specific faculty members that you're interested in, and I don't even believe that there's a limit. I personally suggest that you come up with a limit. I don't like to see applications that are listing 15 faculty members. That just doesn't make a lot of sense. Part of what I ask prospective applicants to do is really, when they're applying into a research-based program, really look carefully at the areas of research section on our department website, where it will show you who's working on what and what their interests are, where their interests lie, papers that they've published, previous grad students, that type of thing. I'd like you to, at the very least, try and focus down on maybe a maximum of 3 or 4 faculty members that you think you're interested in working with. When your application comes in and it's complete, I make it available to those faculty members. Anybody can see your application, but I clearly highlight or bullet point that you're looking at working with Professor Abukder or working with another faculty member in our department. They will have access to your application. For fall admission, they're going to have access to your application until April 1st of 2022, okay? So that's how long I'm making the applications available to the student, for the students. So like I said, the earlier you complete your application, the earlier it goes into the queue, and faculty have an opportunity to access and review it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So we're at 12 noon. So this wraps up our Ask Me Anything event for the Department of Chemical Engineering. I would like to thank all of our panelists for their time and insightful answers to all of today's questions. If you have any lingering questions, and I know unfortunately we weren't able to get to all of them, please feel free to reach out to the Department of Chemical Engineering by booking a private meeting. The link to booking this meeting has been posted in the chat window. Don't forget, if you haven't registered yet for our Waterloo Engineering Graduate Studies Alumni Panel, which is happening this Friday, November 5th, that's tomorrow, from 12 to 1 Eastern Daylight Time, you can still sign up to attend. We will add the link and the information to the chat window as well for that. This virtual event will feature alumni panelists from our graduate programs who will speak about the impact their graduate degree has had on their career path. Thank you once again to all of our panelists, and we look forward to welcoming you to Waterloo Engineering. Have a great day.